The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. I almost laugh every time I recite this lecture verse. I can't tell you how many years I've been reciting it, but when we get to, I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself, I think, will I ever? Will I ever? Is it really going to happen? But I wanted to start by thanking Reverend Master Mayon for asking me to do this talk, and to all of you for coming to listen. Thank you, thank you. So, I want to talk a little bit today about forgiving, forgiveness, forgiving ourselves and forgiving others. And this came up for me when I was reading an article by Reverend Master Dai Sui, our late Reverend Master Dai Sui. I'm going to want to stay there. And it was reprinted in a journal that was a memorial issue for him. He died in 2003. And he wrote an article called What's Important Now? And it struck me at the time I read it, oh, this is really good. There's something for me to learn here. And then I came across it again when I was sorting through some older journals, and I thought, oh, I'm going to reread this. And it was an article on his 25 years, reflecting on his 25 years as a monk. And he talked about scriptures and rules and following the schedule. Some of what he wrote, it's so Reverend Master Dai Sui, and if you knew him, you kind of go, oh, yeah. He said, our master keeps warning us to not try to storm heaven. I'm not quite sure what that means, but everyone else seems to know, so I'd better not ask. And seems to have a knack for calling a tea break just when I'm getting really involved in my meditation. Speaking of which, what is meditation anyway? And am I doing it right? And what do the precepts really mean? And are there secret teachings? Can Zen masters read minds? And was the comment she just made directed personally at me? And which one of these damn things is a rafter square? Boy, if I were in charge, I wouldn't have all these people wasting their time straightening bent nails. And that really spoke to me, because when I came here as a layperson in '82, that was our first work assignment. We didn't have a maintenance building then, and you set up something and you straighten nails, and it was pretty straightforward. So it really took me back to how wonderful and really helpful it was to know Reverend Master Dai Sui. And what he talked about was those things can still be important. As monks, we need to follow the schedule, we need to keep the rules, etc. I'm sure that in your workplaces or your families, there are rules and things that you need to follow. But for him, what was important now were these 9 things. And of course, I'm not going to go into depth in each of them, but I'll read them to you. One was the 3 refuges, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's a real basis of our practice. Faith and trust in both ourselves, in the Sangha, and in the Buddha's teaching and in the Dharma. Truthfulness. He calls truthfulness the simple gateway to a peaceful heart. Empathy and sympathy. He says, from which come acceptance, compassion, and the precepts. Compassion, love, and wisdom, letting each grow into the next when all is ripe. Awareness, I would add mindfulness to that, without which the above doesn't seem to happen. So we have to be aware, we have to practice mindfulness. And meditation, which is the engine that drives all the rest. And then not to fear much, for fear is the only true enemy of religion. And that really spoke to me because I've been really working this past, well, for a long time, but certainly for this last year and a half on letting go. And one of the impediments to letting go is the fear of, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then he concludes by saying, never to give up, by which success is assured. And I think the fact that all of you are here now means that you haven't given up. We're all here. We're trying to make our lives better for ourselves and for others. So I was particularly struck by his including empathy and sympathy. And I asked myself, how do these show ourselves in our daily life to self and to others? And how do we do that? And I was reminded of what has come up for me as a teaching, which is to, I think Reverend Master Jiyu, I don't know whether she actually said this, was quoted as saying, you need to put yourself in someone, you need to walk a mile in someone else's moccasins. And I can recall growing up thinking that one of the sayings that I came up with, that was taught to me, was there, but for the grace of God go I. Well, I never quite understood that, but now as a Buddhist, I'm understanding it more. And so, how do we put ourselves in someone else's situation? How do we look with the eyes of a Buddha? Well, one place to start is recognizing that we are all one. And that's the basic Buddhist teaching, isn't it? All is one and all is different. And I'm getting more comfortable with the all is one, but I still have a little trouble with all is different, because why are they doing that? Why is he or she doing that? Don't they know better? But we won't get into all of that. But you can understand, I think. So when we're able to look with the eyes of a Buddha and see a Buddha, when we're able to recognize that all is one, then I think the next step in offering empathy and sympathy comes more easily. And for me, the next step is offering forgiveness. And actually, I hadn't thought about that a lot. And then I came across an article posted on the Berkeley Buddhist Priory website, written by Reverend Master Kinray, February 20th, 2020, so it's there. And it started me thinking. The article is titled Forgiveness. And I thought, okay, so what exactly, if forgiveness is something I need to look at and to practice, what gets in the way? And what does forgiveness mean? This is how Reverend Master Kinray starts his article. Liberation, the goal of Buddhist training, is the unshakable deliverance of our hearts from all defilements, desire, ill will, and delusion. The problem is how we actually free ourselves from our passions and delusions. Often the teaching and goals of Buddhism seem so vast and unachievable that many of us can find it overwhelming. I'm among those many. Yet Buddhism, he continues, is very practical. And he says, one way that we can ground the practice of Buddhism is to look carefully at all the ill will in our hearts. Whether it is anger and criticism of others, anger at groups of people and institutions, or anger and criticism of ourselves, the Buddhist teaching is to always try to offer everything our unconditional forgiveness. Whenever we choose not to forgive, we are closing our hearts to something and rejecting an aspect of reality. So we can't pick and choose what we offer forgiveness to. And I think for me, that may be one of the biggest challenges. One of Reverend Master Jiyu's favorite sayings was, "When we look with the eyes of a Buddha, we will see the heart of a Buddha." And I think that has really helped me when I think about forgiving myself and forgiving others. So ill will. I hadn't thought about that very much, but I think for me now, I look at it as an underlying attitude of resentment. And it's the opposite of generosity. Reverend Master Kinrei continues, "Much delusion and ill will seems to be part of the normal human response to life. Someone hurts us, and we harbor anger and ill will toward them. The deluded feelings that accompany this ill will are that we are hurting the other person when we blame them and do not forgive them, and that we're not letting them get away with their harmful behavior. But one important insight Buddhist training gives us is to see that when we are harboring anger and criticism in our hearts and minds, we are actually hurting ourselves. One important function of Buddhist practice is to get in touch with our deeper feelings and to realize how much better compassion feels than anger, and how much better forgiveness feels than blame. The wondrous aspect of Buddhist training is that all hurt and all wounds will dissolve and wash away eventually if you are willing to apply the Dharma and stop clinging, letting go. See, letting go is a keynote. When we hold on to the hurt and the damage, we actually feel suffering and keep it alive. So letting go is a big part of being able to offer forgiveness. And for me, when I think about it, what gets in the way? What gets in the way of offering forgiveness? Judgment, criticism, having to be in control, and letting go. Letting go of my opinions, letting go of my judgments, and I have a lot of them still, and letting go of my comfort zone. I got that from Reverend Oriana and Reverend Alina, Reverend Alicia, both of whom have written articles on that in the journal. And it's important to recognize, I think with comfort zone, I obviously have a physical comfort zone, but I also have a mental comfort zone. And being able to recognize that and then letting go of it is very important. So the big question seems to me, how do we learn forgiveness? Well, it's like anything else we need to learn. We have to practice it. But that requires letting go, and it requires this and that and the other thing. So how do we go about that? Well, I think that what's come up for me is that we can start by forgiving ourselves. In the same way that we need to turn the stream of compassion within before we can learn to offer it to others, forgiving ourselves for our past mistakes is essential to forgiving others. And again, quoting from the article by Reverend Kinrei, he says, to forgive everything is necessary if one is going to find the deepest truths of Buddhism. Also, forgiveness grounds our practice in seeing how the hardness of our heart is the problem, not the mistakes of others. It is very liberating when we realize that to find peace, we do not need to change the world. All we need to do is convert our own hearts and minds, and the way we experience the world and ourselves will be transformed. And that phrase, all we need to do is convert our hearts and minds, brings home to me that this work of Buddhist training is not something anybody else can do for me. And at the same time, I can't do it by myself. I need the Buddha, I need the Dharma, and I need the Sangha. All we need to do is convert our own hearts and minds, and the way we experience the world and ourselves will be transformed. As a result of reading that and sitting and contemplating, and I thought about mistakes I have made in the past. And what came up for me was the grief and remorse and regret that I carry to this day for not being with my parents when they died. My mother died at age 52, and my father died at age 53. They were both in Florida. I knew they were dying. My brother kept me apprised of that. I was 19 at the time. I was living in New York. And I was very much involved in seeking fame. I don't think the fortune was so much of it. I think it was the fame. Can I be the best singer? Can I be the best dancer? And when I heard that each of them, but they died within a few months of each other, I thought, well, there's an audition coming up, and there's a class I want to take. And my brother, trying to be helpful, said that, well, I'll tell them you love them. You don't have to kind of give up your life and come back. And, that was the best he could do, and that was the best I could do at the time. But when I really sat with this, and I really thought about it, I have their 2 ihais, their memorial tablets, which I used to keep over in the Achalanatha shrine, but I have them on my altar now. And this only a few days ago. And I went and stood in front of the ihais, and I put my hands in my gasho, and I said, Mom and Dad, I'm really sorry that I wasn't with you when you were dying. And the tears came. I haven't shed tears about that probably since they died. But after I had done that, I had this remarkable feeling of freedom, this remarkable feeling that a burden had been lifted from me. And it made me realize how long I've carried that burden, if you will, of regret and remorse that I wish I had been with them. And it's interesting because in that first paragraph, Reverend Kinray uses the word, the liberation of Buddhist teaching. And if I could use one word to sum up that brief minute or two experience, it would be liberation. So, having experienced that, it came up for me that I could share with you a few reminders that I have found helpful in forgiving myself. And none of these are new. None of these are new. You know them already. Acceptance. When we do something wrong, we have two choices. We can change the situation, or we can try to change it, or we can accept it. And sometimes I have found that our very acceptance of the situation allows the change to happen. When I think about change, I'm encouraged by a quote that I came upon, 30 or 40 years ago by Mahatma Gandhi. And it said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And now, when I think about that, I think about, be the change I want to see in others. Why isn't that other person more sympathetic? Why isn't that other person, yeah? And what I can do is to be the change that I want to see in that others, because I'm convinced after these years of training, see, if I were new to training, this would be embarrassing, but I've been training so long it's not even embarrassing, that the criticisms that I have of others, the changes that I want to see in them, is the criticism of myself. And it's the change I want to see in myself. And recognizing it, that by itself has been eye-opening, to say the least. So another reminder is realizing that things are impermanent. And all things are bound to end. We're all going to die at some point. And the more we hang on to our thoughts and feelings, the more painful it is when we have to let them up, when we have to let go. Remorse and regret, and I've just talked about that. And I'm finding, yes, it was very helpful to look back at what I had done and to feel truly sorry. And I think that feeling truly sorry without beating ourselves up is really challenging. Not dwelling on the past. Yes, it can be helpful to look back and recall our mistakes and shortcomings, but it's not helpful to hold on to them. We have to look at them and say, what can I do now? What can I do now to not repeat this? Obviously, meditating on it. When something from the past repeatedly arising, let it be with you. Take it to your place of meditation and reflect on it. And I think finally, a reminder that has been really helpful to myself and difficult is learning to love yourself. Learning to love yourself. Each of us has the responsibility of our own karma. And truly loving ourselves means doing the very best that we can to help ourselves lead a life of compassion, love, and wisdom. And leading a life of compassion, love, and wisdom is greatly helped, at least for me, by working even just a little bit on humility and gratitude. I guess if there was one thing that I want to be able to hold on to, it's the precepts. I want to hold on to the fact that the precepts are my guiding light. I don't want to hold on to the thou shalt not, because what I found for myself is that the precepts continually expand. The precepts continually take on different meaning. Thank goodness. So I found this quote by Reverend Master Rokusan to be very helpful in this regard. He wrote a lovely article, and we can offer merit for him, by the way, because he recently had some surgery. This is Reverend Rokusan Kranke. He's the prior of our Columbia Zen Buddhist Priory. But this was an article that he wrote in the spring 2017 journal. And what he says in it is, don't believe everything you think. And I thought, oh. And then he says, don't believe everything you feel. Well, why wouldn't I believe everything I think and everything I feel? That's who I am, right? But he continues, our thoughts and our feelings can be the biggest obstacle to making changes in our daily life. So he continues to say that our thoughts and our feelings are developed and molded by our experience, by our education, our environment, how we brought up, who we think we are. And they're only thoughts and feelings. That's all they are, thoughts and feelings. So I'm learning to pay attention to my thoughts and feelings, to be aware and be mindfulness, and be mindful that I don't have to believe everything I think. That's pretty remarkable for me, because I've gone for years believing everything I think, and I don't have to believe everything I feel. And I was encouraged by a remark that is often quoted, and I heard him say this by Reverend Master Daisui, when people said, well, what do we do with, with bad feelings and bad thoughts and etc.? This was in a talk that he gave at the Telford Buddhist Priory years and years ago, obviously. And he said, well, you don't have to invite them in and give them a seat at the table and make tea for them. Remember, he was in England at the time. And I thought, of course, I can just say, this is a thought. This is a feeling. Is it something I need to pay attention to? Maybe, but I don't have to invite it in, give it a seat at the table, and make tea for it. So there are also some other helpful reminders, at least there have been for me. And one of them, this is probably due to getting older. Another helpful reminder is Great Master Dogen's time flies as an arrow. Somehow that has always stuck with me. Time flies as an arrow. Maybe because my brothers did archery, and as a girl, I wanted to do archery too, but they didn't let girls do that when I was growing up. But all we have is this moment right here and right now, inhaling and exhaling, right here and right now. So let us start practicing forgiveness right here, right now, with our very next breath. Reverend Kinray concludes his article by saying, we always have a choice. We are always free to choose the path of forgiveness and compassion, and to transform our hearts from delusion and ill will to the soft openness of compassion and love. So I encourage you to join me in trying to start now. It doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but at least we can start. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Thank you all.